On October 28, 1883, surveyor Benjamin Matthews stumbled through the Missouri Ozark wilderness, his clothes torn and blood streaming from deep gashes across his scalp. He had been running for 3 days and nights, surviving on creek water and wild berries, with only one desperate thought driving him forward. He had to reach civilization before the Holloways found him again. Behind him in the forest, he could still hear the bone-chilling war cries and the baying of hunting hounds that had pursued him like a wounded animal through the dense woodland. Matthews had witnessed something that would haunt him forever. An entire family of humans who had abandoned civilization to hunt other people for sport, tracking them through the wilderness with rifles and knives, as if they were nothing more than deer to be butchered for meat and trophies. This is the chilling story of the Holloway clan, a family of 7 who turned the remote Missouri Ozarks into their personal hunting preserve, where travelers became prey and murder became a blood sport passed down through generations. For nearly a decade, they stalked the forest trails at night, preying on unsuspecting strangers with the practiced skill of professional hunters and the savage cruelty of wild predators. They didn't kill for money or revenge. They killed for the pure exhilaration of the hunt, transforming the ancient forests of the Ozarks into a nightmare realm where human beings were tracked, cornered, and slaughtered like wild game. The Holloway family had lived in the deepest recesses of the Missouri Ozarks for 3 generations, establishing their homestead in a remote valley accessible only by treacherous mountain trails that discouraged casual visitors. The patriarch of the clan was Jeremiah Holloway, a grizzled mountain man in his 60s, whose knowledge of the wilderness was legendary among the scattered settlements of the region. His sons Caleb, Isaac, and Mordecai, along with their wives Sarah and Ruth, and Jeremiah's teenage grandson Daniel, comprised a family unit that had become increasingly isolated from civilized society over the decades. To the few neighbors who encountered them during rare trips to distant trading posts, the Holloways appeared to be skilled hunters and trappers who supplied meat and furs to settlements throughout the Ozarks. They were known for their intimate knowledge of animal behavior, their ability to track prey through the most challenging terrain, and their marksmanship with rifles and bows that was unmatched by anyone in the region. What outsiders could not have known was that the Holloway family had gradually transformed their hunting skills from a means of survival into something far more sinister. Over years of isolation in the wilderness, they had developed a twisted philosophy that viewed human beings as simply another form of game to be hunted, with travelers and strangers categorized according to the challenge they presented as quarry and the entertainment value they provided during pursuit and capture. The family's descent into systematic murder began in 1874, when a lost traveler named William Cooper had stumbled into their valley seeking directions to the nearest settlement. Cooper was a traveling preacher who had been attempting to establish churches in remote communities throughout Missouri and Arkansas when he became separated from his traveling companions during a severe thunderstorm. Cooper's arrival at the Holloway homestead had been viewed by Jeremiah as an opportunity to test his family's hunting skills against human prey rather than the animals they had been tracking throughout their lives. The old mountain man had convinced his sons that Cooper represented a threat to their isolated lifestyle and needed to be eliminated, but rather than simply killing him outright, Jeremiah proposed that they give Cooper a sporting chance by allowing him to run for his life through the forest. The hunt for William Cooper lasted for 2 days and established the pattern that the Holloway family would follow for dozens of subsequent victims. Cooper was given a head start of several hours before the family began tracking him through the wilderness, using techniques they had perfected during years of hunting deer, bear, and other wildlife throughout the Ozarks. The psychological impact of being hunted like an animal had a devastating effect on Cooper's ability to think clearly and make rational decisions about survival. The terror of knowing that skilled hunters were pursuing him with deadly intent, combined with exhaustion and hunger from running through unfamiliar terrain, reduced the educated preacher to a desperate animal driven by pure survival instinct. The Holloway family's hunting techniques included sophisticated methods for herding their human prey in predetermined directions, cutting off escape routes, and gradually wearing down their victims through psychological torture and physical exhaustion. They used their knowledge of local terrain to force victims into areas where capture would be inevitable, while prolonging the hunt to maximize their entertainment and the victim's suffering. When Cooper was finally cornered in a box canyon after 48 hours of continuous pursuit, the Holloway family did not kill him immediately. Instead, they subjected him to elaborate torture, designed to extract information about other travelers who might be vulnerable to similar attacks, while satisfying their growing appetite for inflicting pain and terror on helpless victims. The murder of William Cooper marked the beginning of a systematic campaign of terror that would continue for nearly a decade and claim the lives of at least 37 people who made the fatal mistake of traveling through the remote sections of the Missouri Ozarks, where the Holloway clan had established their hunting territory. The family's methods became increasingly sophisticated as they gained experience in hunting human prey. They learned to identify ideal victims by observing travelers at distant trading posts and settlements, selecting individuals who appeared to be traveling alone or in small groups that could be overwhelmed by superior numbers and intimate knowledge of local terrain. Jeremiah Holloway served as the tactical commander for the family's hunting expeditions, using his decades of experience tracking animals to develop strategies for herding human victims into predetermined killing zones. His sons served as the primary hunters and killers, while the women of the family were responsible for disposing of bodies and managing the practical aspects of concealing evidence. The hunting techniques employed by the Holloway family included the use of trained dogs to track victims through the forest, carefully placed noisemakers to drive prey in desired directions, and sophisticated understanding of human psychology that enabled them to predict how their victims would react to various forms of terror and intimidation. The family had also developed an elaborate trophy system that included collecting personal items from victims as mementos of successful hunts, preserving body parts as decorative elements for their homestead, and maintaining detailed records of each hunt that documented the methods used, the duration of pursuit, and the entertainment value provided by different types of victims. By 1880, the Holloway clan had perfected their hunting methods to such an extent that they were able to kill multiple victims per month during the busy travel seasons when migrants and merchants were most likely to pass through their territory. Their success rate was nearly 100%, as no victim had ever escaped their hunting grounds alive to report the family's activities to authorities. The psychological dynamics within the Holloway family during their hunting expeditions reveal a complex system of shared sadism and mutual reinforcement that enabled multiple individuals to participate in systematic murder while viewing their activities as legitimate sport rather than criminal behavior. Jeremiah's role as patriarch and hunting leader provided ideological justification for the family's activities through his twisted philosophy that portrayed civilization as weakness and predation as natural law. He taught his sons and grandson that hunting humans was not only acceptable, but actually superior to hunting animals because people provided more challenging and entertaining prey. The women of the family, Sarah and Ruth, played crucial supporting roles that included luring victims into vulnerable positions, participating in torture sessions, and managing the disposal of bodies and evidence. Their participation in the family's criminal activities was essential to the operation's success and demonstrated how criminal behavior could become normalized within family structures where violence was viewed as entertainment. The most disturbing aspect of the Holloway family's activities was their systematic approach to developing hunting skills specifically for killing people. They practiced tracking techniques on captured victims who were released multiple times to provide training opportunities, experimented with different weapons and torture methods to identify the most effective approaches, and continuously refined their strategies based on experience gained from previous hunts. Daniel Holloway, the teenage grandson, represented the next generation of the family's criminal enterprise. His education in hunting humans began at age 12 and included training in tracking, weapons use, torture techniques, and the psychological manipulation necessary to extract information from victims before killing them. The family's criminal activities were facilitated by the extreme isolation of their homestead and the lack of effective law enforcement in the remote regions of the Missouri Ozarks. The scattered settlements of the region had minimal communication with outside authorities, making it easy for the Holloways to operate without detection while disposing of evidence in the vast wilderness that surrounded their hunting grounds. The seasonal patterns of travel through the Ozarks provided the Holloway family with predictable opportunities to identify and capture victims. Spring and fall migration seasons brought steady streams of settlers and merchants through the mountain passes, while summer months brought government surveyors, timber crews and other workers whose disappearances could be attributed to various frontier hazards. The family's hunting expeditions were carefully planned operations that began with surveillance of potential victims, continued through systematic stalking and herding tactics designed to isolate prey in vulnerable locations, and concluded with elaborate torture and killing rituals that satisfied the family's appetite for violence and entertainment. The psychological impact of being hunted by the Holloway family was so devastating that most victims lost the ability to think rationally about survival strategies within the first few hours of pursuit. The combination of physical exhaustion, terror, and the surreal nature of being treated as game animals reduced educated and capable individuals to desperate creatures driven entirely by panic and survival instinct. Dr. Samuel Morrison, a physician traveling to establish a medical practice in Arkansas, became one of the family's victims in August 1881 after making the mistake of camping within the boundaries of their hunting territory. Morrison's medical knowledge and physical fitness made him a challenging target that provided the family with several days of entertainment before his eventual capture and torture. Morrison's ordeal was documented in detail by the Holloway family as part of their record-keeping system for tracking successful hunts. The physician was subjected to medical experiments conducted by family members who were curious about human anatomy and physiology, providing them with opportunities to practice torture techniques while gaining knowledge about the most effective methods for prolonging victim suffering. The murder of Dr. Morrison exemplified the Holloway family's approach to human hunting, which combined practical considerations about eliminating potential witnesses with entertainment value derived from the pursuit, capture, and torture of victims. Morrison's medical knowledge made him particularly valuable for experimentation, while his physical condition provided the family with an extended hunting experience that lasted for nearly a week. The family's trophy collection, discovered during the eventual investigation of their crimes, included items taken from Dr. Morrison and dozens of other victims whose identities were never established due to the remote locations where their remains were eventually found. These trophies served both as mementos of successful hunts and as evidence of the systematic nature of the family's criminal activities. The hunting territory controlled by the Holloway clan encompassed more than 50 square miles of wilderness in the most remote sections of the Missouri Ozarks. This territory included multiple campsites, hunting cabins, and storage locations that were strategically positioned to support extended hunting expeditions while providing secure locations for torturing victims and disposing of evidence. The family's intimate knowledge of their hunting territory enabled them to predict where victims would attempt to hide, which routes they would use to escape, and where they could be cornered most effectively. This knowledge was accumulated over years of tracking animals through the same terrain, and was enhanced by systematic mapping of human behavior patterns observed during previous hunting expeditions. The seasonal cycle of the Holloway family's criminal activities followed the natural rhythms of animal migration and human travel through the region. Spring hunts focused on migrants and settlers traveling west. Summer expeditions targeted government surveyors and timber workers. Fall hunts concentrated on merchants and traders moving goods between settlements, and winter activities involved planning and preparation for the following year's hunting season. The family's success in avoiding detection for nearly a decade was due partly to their isolation and partly to the systematic nature of their body disposal methods. Victims were killed in locations where natural decomposition and scavenging by wild animals would eliminate physical evidence, while personal effects were either destroyed or distributed among family members as trophies. The psychological profile of the Holloway family members reveals individuals who had completely abandoned normal human moral constraints in favor of a predatory lifestyle that viewed other people as entertainment and prey. This transformation had occurred gradually over years of isolation, reinforced by family dynamics that normalized violence and encouraged competition in hunting skills. Jeremiah Holloway's leadership style emphasized the superiority of predatory behavior over civilized conduct, teaching his family that weakness and compassion were character flaws that interfered with natural selection and survival. His philosophical justifications for murder created an ideological framework that enabled family members to view their criminal activities as legitimate and even virtuous. The family's religious beliefs, such as they were, had been perverted into a twisted form of social Darwinism that portrayed their hunting activities as carrying out divine will by eliminating weak individuals who were unfit for survival. This rationalization system enabled them to maintain their self-image as moral people while committing acts of extreme evil. The discovery of the Holloway family's crimes began with Benjamin Matthews' escape from their hunting territory in October 1883. Matthews was a government surveyor who had been mapping timber resources in the Ozarks when he encountered the family and became their intended victim. His survival and subsequent report to federal authorities initiated the investigation that would eventually expose the full extent of their criminal activities. Matthews's escape was the first successful breakout from the Holloway hunting territory in nearly a decade of criminal activity. His survival was due partly to luck and partly to his professional knowledge of wilderness survival techniques that enabled him to evade capture longer than most victims and ultimately reach safety despite being pursued by skilled hunters and tracking dogs. The surveyor's account of his ordeal provided federal investigators with their first detailed information about the Holloway family's methods, territory, and the systematic nature of their criminal activities. Matthews described being hunted like an animal through terrain that the family knew intimately, while being subjected to psychological torture designed to increase his terror and reduce his ability to think rationally about escape. Matthews also provided crucial information about the family's hunting techniques, including their use of dogs to track victims, their sophisticated understanding of human psychology and behavior under extreme stress, and their systematic approach to herding prey into predetermined killing zones where escape would be impossible. The federal investigation of the Holloway family's crimes was led by Deputy U.S. Marshal William Crawford, who had extensive experience investigating criminal activities in remote frontier regions. Crawford recognized that the Holloway case represented a new type of criminal enterprise that required specialized knowledge of both criminal investigation and wilderness survival techniques. Marshal Crawford's investigation was complicated by the extreme isolation of the Holloway territory and the family's intimate knowledge of terrain that was unfamiliar to law enforcement officials. The investigation required the services of experienced guides and trackers who could navigate the dangerous mountain terrain while avoiding detection by family members who were skilled at identifying and eliminating potential threats. The initial phase of the investigation involved mapping the Holloway family's hunting territory and identifying locations where victims had been killed or tortured based on physical evidence and Matthews' descriptions of landmarks he had observed during his escape. This mapping process revealed the systematic nature of the family's operations and the extensive infrastructure they had developed to support their criminal activities. The investigation also involved interviewing residents of scattered settlements throughout the region to identify missing persons who might have been victims of the Holloway family's hunting expeditions. This process was complicated by the transient nature of the population and the lack of systematic record-keeping in frontier communities, making it difficult to establish definitive lists of missing individuals. Federal agents discovered evidence that the Holloway family had been responsible for disappearances dating back nearly a decade, with victim counts far exceeding initial estimates based on Matthews' testimony. The systematic nature of their activities and the efficiency of their body disposal methods had concealed the true extent of their crimes from authorities and communities throughout the region. The tactical challenges of apprehending the Holloway family in their remote mountain stronghold required careful planning and coordination between federal agents and local law enforcement officials. The family's knowledge of local terrain and their skills as hunters and fighters meant that any attempt to capture them would be extremely dangerous for law enforcement personnel. Marshal Crawford's operational plan involved surrounding the Holloway territory with multiple teams of agents positioned at strategic locations to prevent family members from escaping into the wilderness. The plan also included provisions for dealing with the family's hunting dogs and their sophisticated early warning systems that would alert them to the presence of intruders. The raid on the Holloway homestead was conducted at dawn on November 15, 1883, with federal agents approaching from multiple directions to prevent escape while minimizing the risk of armed resistance from family members who were known to be expert marksmen with intimate knowledge of defensive positions throughout their territory. The initial phase of the raid proceeded successfully, with agents capturing several family members who were taken by surprise before they could organize effective resistance. However, Jeremiah Holloway and his eldest son Caleb managed to escape into the forest with hunting rifles and tracking dogs, initiating a pursuit that would last for several days and demonstrate the family's formidable survival skills. The evidence discovered at the Holloway homestead confirmed the worst fears of federal investigators about the systematic nature of the family's criminal activities. The homestead contained extensive trophy collections, detailed records of hunting expeditions, torture equipment, and human remains that provided definitive proof of systematic murder over nearly a decade. The trophy collection included personal items taken from dozens of victims, preserved body parts that had been used as decorative elements, and weapons that had been taken from murdered travelers and incorporated into the family's hunting arsenal. These trophies provided investigators with evidence linking the family to specific missing persons cases throughout the region. The hunting records maintained by the family included detailed descriptions of individual victims, documentation of hunting techniques and their effectiveness, and evaluation criteria used to assess the entertainment value provided by different types of prey. These records revealed the calculating and systematic nature of the family's approach to murder and the extent to which they had developed human hunting as a specialized criminal activity. The torture equipment found at the homestead included devices specifically designed for inflicting pain on human victims, as well as medical instruments that had been adapted for conducting experiments on captured prey. This equipment demonstrated the family's evolution from simple murderers to sophisticated practitioners of systematic torture and human experimentation. The human remains discovered throughout the Holloway territory confirmed that the family's victim count far exceeded initial estimates, with evidence of at least 37 murders discovered during the initial investigation. Subsequent searches revealed additional burial sites and disposal locations that suggested the actual number of victims might have been significantly higher. The manhunt for the escaped Holloway family members became one of the most extensive law enforcement operations conducted in the Missouri Ozarks up to that point, involving dozens of federal agents, local law enforcement officers, and civilian guides familiar with the challenging mountain terrain. Jeremiah Holloway's knowledge of the wilderness and his skills as a tracker and hunter made him an extremely dangerous fugitive who posed significant risks to anyone who attempted to pursue him through terrain that he knew intimately and his pursuers found completely unfamiliar. The pursuit of the fugitive family members lasted for 6 days and covered more than 100 miles of treacherous mountain terrain before federal agents finally cornered Jeremiah and Caleb Holloway in a remote canyon where they made their final stand against law enforcement. The shootout that ended the Holloway manhunt was brief but violent, with both fugitive family members killed while attempting to fight their way through the law enforcement perimeter. Their deaths eliminated the last active members of the criminal organization and ended nearly a decade of systematic murder in the Missouri Ozarks. The trial of the surviving Holloway family members began in Springfield, Missouri, in February 1884 and attracted national attention as prosecutors presented evidence of systematic murder that exceeded anything previously documented in American frontier history. The case represented one of the first major prosecutions to focus specifically on criminal activities that treated human beings as game animals to be hunted for sport. The prosecution's case was built around the extensive physical evidence discovered at the Holloway homestead, the detailed records maintained by the family of their hunting expeditions, and the testimony of Benjamin Matthews about his experience as an intended victim of their criminal activities. The evidence presented during the trial included the family's trophy collections, their hunting records, torture equipment, and human remains that provided definitive proof of systematic murder conducted over nearly a decade. The prosecution also presented expert testimony about hunting techniques and wilderness survival that explained how the family had been able to track and kill victims with such devastating effectiveness. The psychological aspects of the case were explored through testimony from medical experts who attempted to explain how an entire family could abandon normal moral constraints to engage in systematic murder for entertainment. These experts described the process of moral deterioration that could occur in isolated environments where criminal behavior became normalized through family dynamics and ideological justification. The defense attorneys attempted to argue that the Holloway family members were victims of frontier conditions that had driven them to madness, claiming that years of isolation and the harsh realities of wilderness survival had destroyed their ability to distinguish between hunting animals and hunting humans. However, the systematic nature of the family's criminal activities and the sophisticated planning evident in their operations contradicted claims of insanity or diminished capacity. The evidence showed that the family had made deliberate choices to abandon civilized behavior in favor of predatory lifestyle that viewed other humans as prey to be hunted for entertainment. The jury's verdict reflected their horror at the extent and nature of the Holloway family's crimes, with guilty verdicts returned on all counts of murder in the first degree. The sentences imposed included death penalties for the adult male family members and life imprisonment for the women and teenage grandson who were viewed as having lesser culpability for the family's criminal activities. The execution of Isaac and Mordecai Holloway was carried out in Springfield on June 12, 1884, drawing thousands of spectators who came to witness justice being served for what newspapers described as the most heinous crimes in Missouri history. The executions marked the end of the Holloway clan and the systematic reign of terror they had conducted in the remote regions of the Ozarks. The impact of the Holloway case on law enforcement practices and public awareness of frontier crime was significant and lasting. The case demonstrated that criminal activities in remote areas could reach levels of sophistication and systematic organization that exceeded anything previously encountered by American law enforcement. The investigation techniques developed during the Holloway case influenced law enforcement approaches to crimes involving wilderness areas and remote territories where conventional investigative methods were inadequate. The case also highlighted the need for better communication and coordination between federal and local law enforcement agencies when dealing with crimes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries. The psychological insights gained from studying the Holloway family contributed to early understanding of how criminal behavior could develop and be sustained within family structures, particularly in isolated environments where normal social controls were absent and deviant behavior could be normalized through ideological justification. The case also influenced public policy regarding settlement patterns and law enforcement presence in frontier territories, as communities recognized that extreme isolation could create conditions where systematic criminal activity could flourish without detection or intervention by authorities. The cultural impact of the Holloway case was reflected in literature, journalism, and folklore that portrayed the family as examples of how civilized people could degenerate into savage predators when removed from social constraints and moral guidance provided by established communities. The victims of the Holloway family hunting expeditions deserve to be remembered as individuals whose lives were destroyed by systematic evil that treated human beings as entertainment rather than as people with inherent dignity and rights. Their deaths serve as reminders of the vulnerability of travelers in remote areas and the importance of maintaining law enforcement presence in regions where isolation might enable criminal activities to flourish. Dr. Samuel Morrison, the physician whose torture and murder was documented in detail by the family's record-keeping system, represented the type of educated professional whose skills and knowledge could have contributed significantly to frontier community development. His death deprived Arkansas settlements of needed medical services while demonstrating the Holloway family's complete disregard for human life and social value. William Cooper, the traveling preacher whose murder initiated the family's descent into systematic human hunting, represented the religious and moral leadership that frontier communities needed to maintain civilized values and social cohesion. His death marked the beginning of a criminal enterprise that would claim dozens of additional lives over nearly a decade. The government surveyors, timber workers, merchants, and settlers who fell victim to the Holloway hunting expeditions were individuals whose economic activities and community development efforts contributed to the growth and civilization of the American frontier. Their deaths represented not only personal tragedies, but also losses to the broader project of establishing stable and prosperous communities in challenging wilderness environments. The legacy of the Holloway clan case continues to influence discussions about criminal behavior in isolated communities, the importance of maintaining law enforcement presence in remote areas, and the psychological factors that enable individuals to abandon moral constraints in favor of predatory behavior toward other human beings. The case serves as a permanent reminder that civilization is a fragile achievement that requires constant maintenance and protection, particularly in environments where isolation and harsh conditions might encourage the abandonment of moral principles and social obligations that make peaceful coexistence possible. The story of the Holloway family demonstrates how quickly civilized behavior can deteriorate when individuals are removed from social institutions and moral guidance that reinforce ethical conduct and community responsibility. Their transformation from skilled hunters into systematic human predators illustrates the importance of maintaining connections to broader communities that provide moral support and social accountability. In the end, the chilling story of the Holloway clan serves as both a historical account of frontier crime and a cautionary tale about the conditions that can enable systematic evil to flourish when normal social controls are absent and criminal behavior becomes normalized through family dynamics and ideological justification. The 37 confirmed victims of the Holloway family hunting expeditions deserve to be remembered not as statistics in a sensational criminal case, but as individuals whose hopes, dreams, and contributions were destroyed by predators who abandoned their humanity in favor of treating other people as game to be hunted for sport and entertainment. Their tragedy reminds us that the price of maintaining civilization is eternal vigilance against those who would abandon moral constraints in favor of predatory behavior, and that our responsibility to protect vulnerable individuals extends beyond established communities to include remote areas where isolation might enable systematic criminal activity to develop and persist without detection or intervention. The blood-soaked forests of the Missouri Ozarks have long since healed from the horrors inflicted by the Holloway clan, but the memory of their crimes serves as a permanent warning that evil can flourish anywhere humans choose to abandon the moral principles that separate civilization from savagery, and that our vigilance against such evil must never cease, no matter how remote or unlikely the threat might appear. The investigation into the full extent of the Holloway family's crimes revealed evidence that their hunting activities had been far more systematic and extensive than initially understood. Federal agents discovered that the family had maintained detailed maps of their hunting territory that marked the locations of successful kills, torture sites, and body disposal areas with the precision of professional surveyors. These hunting maps, drawn on deer hide and marked with symbols that corresponded to different types of victims and hunting methods, revealed that the Holloway clan had divided their territory into specific zones designed for different phases of their hunting operations. The outer zones served as observation areas where potential victims could be identified and assessed, while inner zones provided locations for stalking, herding, and eventual capture. The family's hunting calendar, discovered among Jeremiah's personal effects, showed that they had planned their activities around seasonal travel patterns and natural phenomena that would provide optimal conditions for tracking and killing human prey. Spring hunts coincided with westward migration, summer expeditions targeted government surveyors working during favorable weather, and fall operations focused on merchants transporting goods before winter. The psychological preparation for human hunting involved elaborate rituals that the family had developed to mentally transition from their roles as isolated mountain dwellers to predatory hunters. These rituals included war paint made from animal blood and clay, ceremonial donning of clothing and equipment taken from previous victims, and group chants that reinforced their identity as superior predators entitled to hunt weaker humans. The family's hunting equipment had been specifically modified for killing people rather than animals, with rifles fitted with special sights for long-distance shooting, knives designed for inflicting maximum pain rather than quick kills, and restraint devices adapted from animal traps to hold human victims during torture sessions. The Holloway family's trophy room, located in a hidden chamber beneath their main cabin, contained evidence of their crimes that horrified even experienced federal investigators. The room featured a macabre display of human skulls, preserved hands and feet, and clothing items arranged as monuments to successful hunts. Each trophy was labeled with information about the victim, including name when known, date of capture, duration of hunt, and methods used for torture and killing. The labels revealed that the family had kept meticulous records of their criminal activities and had taken pride in developing increasingly sophisticated techniques for hunting and killing human prey. The family's hunting techniques had evolved continuously over their decade of criminal activity, with innovations designed to increase the challenge and entertainment value of their expeditions. Early hunts had been relatively simple affairs involving basic tracking and shooting, but later expeditions incorporated complex psychological warfare, elaborate torture scenarios, and extended pursuit sequences that could last for days. The development of specialized hunting roles within the family demonstrated their systematic approach to murder and their ability to coordinate complex criminal operations. Jeremiah served as the strategic planner and huntmaster, making decisions about victim selection and overall tactics. His sons functioned as the primary trackers and killers, using their physical strength and marksmanship skills to capture and murder victims. Sarah and Ruth, the women of the family, played crucial roles in victim assessment and psychological manipulation. They were responsible for gathering intelligence about potential targets during the family's rare visits to trading posts and settlements, using their ability to engage in casual conversation to extract information about travelers' routes, resources, and vulnerabilities. The women also participated directly in torture sessions, often serving as interrogators, who used their apparent femininity to create false hope in victims who might believe that women would be more merciful than the male family members. This psychological manipulation was particularly effective in breaking down victims' resistance and extracting information about other potential targets. Daniel Holloway, the teenage grandson, represented the next generation of the family's criminal enterprise and had been systematically trained in all aspects of human hunting from the age of 12. His education included tracking techniques, weapons training, torture methods, and the psychological skills necessary to identify and exploit human weaknesses during hunting expeditions. The boy's training records, maintained by Jeremiah as part of his comprehensive documentation system, showed a systematic curriculum designed to transform a normal child into an efficient human predator. The training began with hunting animals, using methods that could be adapted for killing people, progressed through psychological conditioning designed to eliminate empathy and moral constraints, and culminated in direct participation in the torture and murder of human victims. By age 16, Daniel had become one of the family's most effective hunters, possessing youth and energy that complemented the experience and knowledge of the adult family members. His role in hunting expeditions often involved serving as a scout who could move quickly through difficult terrain to identify escape routes and potential hiding places used by fleeing victims. The family's hunting dogs, a pack of mixed-breed animals trained specifically for tracking humans, represented another innovation in their criminal methodology. These dogs had been conditioned to recognize and follow human scent trails while remaining silent during tracking operations to avoid alerting prey to their presence. The training of hunting dogs for human tracking required sophisticated understanding of animal psychology and behavior modification that the Holloway family had developed through years of working with animals in their wilderness environment. The dogs were taught to distinguish between the scents of family members and those of potential victims, to track human prey through various terrain and weather conditions, and to attack on command during capture operations. The family's use of trained dogs provided them with significant advantages over their victims, particularly during night hunts, when human vision was limited, but canine senses remained acute. The dogs could track victims who believed they had successfully concealed their location, follow scent trails through water and over rocky terrain that would confuse human trackers, and provide early warning of victims' movements during extended hunting operations. The torture techniques employed by the Holloway family revealed a systematic approach to inflicting suffering that combined practical interrogation methods with sadistic entertainment. The family had developed specialized equipment and procedures designed to maximize victim pain while keeping them conscious and responsive for extended periods. The torture chamber discovered beneath the family's cabin contained devices that had been adapted from animal trapping and butchering equipment for use on human victims. These included restraint systems that could hold victims in positions that made resistance impossible while providing access for torture implements, and cutting tools designed to inflict precise wounds that would cause maximum pain without immediate death. The family's knowledge of human anatomy, gained through their torture activities, and supplemented by information extracted from victims with medical training, enabled them to conduct elaborate experiments in pain infliction and psychological breakdown. They had learned which injuries would disable victims without killing them immediately, how to prolong consciousness during severe trauma, and what psychological pressures were most effective in breaking down human resistance. The records of torture sessions maintained by the family included detailed observations about victim responses to different forms of physical and psychological abuse. These records served both as entertainment for family members who enjoyed reliving successful hunts and as technical documentation that could be used to improve future torture techniques. The family's experiments in human torture had led to the development of increasingly sophisticated methods for extracting information about victims' backgrounds, resources, and connections that might be exploited for future criminal activities. They had learned to identify the psychological pressure points that would make victims most willing to provide useful intelligence about other potential targets. The disposal methods used by the Holloway family demonstrated their systematic approach to concealing evidence and their intimate knowledge of the wilderness environment that served as their hunting ground. Bodies were disposed of in locations where natural decomposition and scavenging by wild animals would eliminate physical evidence within months of death. The family had identified specific disposal sites throughout their territory based on factors including accessibility during different seasons, natural drainage patterns that would wash away evidence, and the presence of scavenging animals that would accelerate decomposition and scatter remains. The burial sites discovered during the federal investigation revealed that the family had used different disposal methods depending on the circumstances of each kill and the amount of time available for concealing evidence. Some bodies were buried in shallow graves that would be quickly discovered by animals, while others were placed in natural caves or sinkholes where remains might never be found. The family's knowledge of local wildlife behavior enabled them to predict which disposal sites would be most effective for eliminating evidence. They understood the feeding patterns of bears, wolves, and other scavengers that would consume human remains, and they used this knowledge to ensure that bodies would be completely destroyed within weeks of disposal. The systematic nature of the family's evidence disposal was revealed through the discovery of their detailed maps showing the locations of burial sites, disposal areas, and seasonal accessibility routes. These maps demonstrated that the family had treated body disposal as a logistical challenge, requiring careful planning and execution rather than simply a necessary cleanup activity. The financial aspects of the Holloway family's criminal activities were more complex than simple robbery, as they had developed systems for converting victims' possessions into resources that could support their hunting operations and isolated lifestyle. Personal items taken from victims were sorted into categories based on their utility and value, with useful items incorporated into the family's equipment and valuable items traded at distant settlements where questions would not be asked. The family's trading activities required careful management to avoid arousing suspicion about their sources of valuable goods. They had established relationships with unscrupulous merchants in remote settlements who would purchase gold, jewelry, and other valuables without asking questions about their origins. The weapons collected from victims represented a particularly valuable category of loot, as quality firearms were expensive and difficult to obtain in frontier regions. The family had accumulated an arsenal of rifles, pistols, and ammunition that far exceeded what would be normal for an isolated mountain family, providing them with superior firepower for future hunting expeditions. The clothing and personal effects taken from victims served multiple purposes in the family's operations. High-quality clothing could be worn by family members during their rare visits to settlements, providing them with more respectable appearances that would make their trading activities less suspicious. Personal documents could be studied to gain intelligence about potential future targets, or used to create false identities if the family needed to relocate their operations. The psychological impact of wearing victims' clothing during hunting expeditions provided additional entertainment value for family members who enjoyed the symbolism of literally taking their prey's place in the world. This practice also served practical purposes by providing the family with clothing suitable for different weather conditions and social situations. The family's camp followers, a small group of social outcasts and criminals who had been recruited to assist with hunting operations, provided additional manpower and specialized skills that enhanced the family's criminal capabilities. These associates were not full family members, but served as scouts, guides, and assistants during large hunting expeditions. The recruitment of outside assistants represented an evolution in the family's criminal methods and demonstrated their recognition that expanded operations would require additional personnel. The associates were carefully selected based on their criminal backgrounds, survival skills, and willingness to participate in systematic murder without moral qualms. The management of criminal associates required sophisticated leadership and organizational skills that Jeremiah had developed through his years of controlling family operations. The associates were kept in subordinate positions that prevented them from gaining enough knowledge to threaten the family's security, while providing them with sufficient rewards to maintain their loyalty and cooperation. The training provided to criminal associates included instruction in hunting techniques, weapons use, and the family's methods for tracking and capturing human prey. However, the associates were not given access to the family's most sensitive information, including the locations of burial sites, the details of torture techniques, or the financial resources accumulated through their criminal activities. The family's expansion through criminal associates represented both an opportunity for increased success and a potential security threat that required careful management. The associates provided additional capabilities for conducting larger hunting operations, but they also increased the risk of discovery if any of them were captured or decided to cooperate with law enforcement. The seasonal headquarters used by the Holloway family during different phases of their hunting operations revealed the extent of their territorial control and the sophistication of their logistical planning. These temporary camps were strategically positioned throughout their hunting territory to provide shelter, equipment storage, and staging areas for hunting expeditions. Each seasonal camp was equipped with supplies and equipment appropriate for the hunting conditions expected during different times of the year. Spring camps focused on hunting migrants and settlers, with equipment for long-range tracking and pursuit through muddy terrain. Summer camps were positioned to intercept government surveyors and timber crews, with specialized equipment for hunting in dense forest conditions. The winter camps served as planning and preparation centers, where the family would analyze the previous year's hunting activities, repair and modify equipment, and develop strategies for future operations. These camps also functioned as training centers where new techniques could be practiced, and where Daniel and any criminal associates could receive instruction in hunting methods. The family's communication system between different camps and their main homestead involved coded signals and message systems that enabled coordination of hunting activities across their extensive territory. These communication methods included smoke signals, arranged markers, and pre-arranged meeting schedules that allowed family members to coordinate complex hunting operations without alerting potential victims to their presence. The discovery of the family's communication system during the federal investigation revealed the sophisticated planning and coordination required for their hunting operations. The system demonstrated that the family had developed organizational capabilities comparable to those of military units operating in hostile territory. The psychological warfare techniques employed by the Holloway family during hunting expeditions were designed to maximize victim terror while reducing their ability to think rationally about escape and survival. These techniques included deliberate noise-making to create fear and confusion, the use of hunting calls and signals that would disorient victims, and calculated displays of the family's hunting trophies to demonstrate their efficiency as killers. The family had learned that psychological terror was often more effective than physical constraints in controlling victims' behavior during hunting expeditions. Victims who were terrified and confused were less likely to identify escape opportunities, more likely to make tactical mistakes that would lead to capture, and easier to manipulate during interrogation and torture sessions. The use of psychological warfare also provided entertainment value for family members who enjoyed observing the impact of their intimidation techniques on victims' mental state. The family had developed elaborate scenarios designed to maximize victim terror, including staged displays of previous victims' remains and carefully orchestrated demonstrations of their hunting skills and equipment. The family's understanding of human psychology under extreme stress enabled them to predict victim behavior with remarkable accuracy and to design hunting strategies that would exploit predictable human responses to terror and exhaustion. They had learned to identify the psychological breaking point where victims would abandon rational survival strategies in favor of panic-driven flight that would make capture inevitable. The medical knowledge accumulated by the Holloway family through their torture activities and contact with victims who possessed medical training enabled them to conduct increasingly sophisticated experiments in human physiology and psychology. This knowledge was used both to improve their torture techniques and to understand the physical and psychological limits of human endurance during extended hunting operations. The family had learned to identify signs of physical exhaustion and dehydration that would indicate when victims were reaching the limits of their endurance, enabling them to time capture operations for maximum psychological impact. They understood how fear and exhaustion affected human judgment and decision-making, and they used this knowledge to manipulate victims into making tactical errors that would lead to capture. The medical experiments conducted by the family on captured victims served both practical and entertainment purposes, providing them with knowledge about human anatomy and physiology while satisfying their appetite for inflicting systematic torture. These experiments were documented in detail as part of the family's comprehensive record-keeping system and were used to develop improved techniques for future torture sessions. The family's accumulation of medical knowledge represented a perversion of healing arts into instruments of torture and death. Their systematic approach to understanding human physiology enabled them to prolong victim suffering while maintaining consciousness and responsiveness during extended torture sessions. The seasonal variations in the family's hunting methods reflected their adaptation to changing environmental conditions and the different types of victims available during different times of the year. Spring hunts focused on families and groups traveling together, requiring different tactics than the summer hunts that targeted individual surveyors and government workers. The family's seasonal hunting calendar was coordinated with natural phenomena that would provide optimal conditions for their operations. New moon phases provided darkness for night hunting. Seasonal storms could be used to mask the sounds of hunting activities, and migration patterns of both animals and humans were incorporated into hunting plans. The adaptation of hunting methods to seasonal conditions demonstrated the family's sophistication in understanding both their environment and their prey. They had developed specialized techniques for hunting in different weather conditions, terrain types, and seasonal circumstances that might affect victim behavior and hunting success rates. The legacy of the Holloway clan's crimes extended far beyond their immediate victims to influence law enforcement practices, frontier settlement patterns, and public awareness of the dangers posed by criminal activities in remote wilderness areas. Their case demonstrated that systematic criminal enterprise could develop and flourish in isolated environments where normal social controls were absent and detection was unlikely. The investigation techniques developed during the Holloway case became models for law enforcement agencies, dealing with crimes in wilderness areas and remote territories where conventional investigation methods were inadequate. The case highlighted the need for specialized training in wilderness survival and tracking skills for law enforcement personnel assigned to frontier territories. The psychological insights gained from studying the Holloway family influenced early understanding of how criminal behavior could develop and be transmitted within family structures, particularly in isolated environments where deviant behavior could be normalized through ideological justification and social reinforcement. The case also contributed to public policy discussions about settlement patterns and law enforcement presence in frontier territories, as communities recognized that extreme isolation could create conditions where systematic criminal activity could flourish without detection or intervention by authorities. The cultural impact of the Holloway case was reflected in literature, journalism, and folklore that portrayed the family as cautionary examples of how civilized people could degenerate into savage predators when removed from social institutions and moral guidance that reinforced ethical behavior and community responsibility. The transformation of the Holloway family from skilled hunters into systematic human predators serves as a permanent reminder that the veneer of civilization is thin, and that moral principles must be actively maintained through social institutions and community oversight to prevent the emergence of predatory behavior toward vulnerable individuals. Their story demonstrates that evil can flourish in any environment where moral constraints are abandoned and criminal behavior is rationalized through ideological systems that portray predation as natural or justified. The family's descent into systematic murder illustrates the importance of maintaining connections to broader communities that provide moral support and social accountability. In remembering the 37 confirmed victims of the Holloway family's hunting expeditions, we honor not only their individual lives, but also their contributions to the difficult work of building civilization in challenging frontier environments. Their deaths serve as reminders that the price of maintaining civilized society is eternal vigilance against those who would abandon moral principles in favor of predatory behavior toward their fellow human beings. The blood-soaked hunting grounds of the Missouri Ozarks have been reclaimed by nature, but the memory of the horrors that occurred there continues to serve as a warning about the conditions that can enable systematic evil to flourish when communities fail to protect their most vulnerable members, and when individuals choose to abandon the moral principles that separate civilization from savagery.